Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'll be discussing my take on today's PMQs, where Sunak was played yet again by Starmer, but where also the new SNP's leader in Westminster followed Ian Blackford's previous line of bringing Labour into their attack as well as the Tories. All got very interesting, but first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So I'm feeling a little bit better today. I'll probably get in front of the camera tomorrow. But yeah, two main parts I think this video properly split into two, because there's questions and responses between Starmer and Sunak, and then the questions from the new SNP leader in Westminster, Flynn, were all, I thought, very interesting. Starmer began by asking about the government's manifesto promise to build 300,000 new homes a year and why Rishi Sunak broke that promise this week by pulling mandatory targets for councils. He asked what's changed. Sunak then replied that Starmer was focusing on the politics but not the detail of the new policy. He said that it was about protecting the green belt and investing in brownfield sites. Only it wasn't. It was about having targets for house building and then saying we don't need those targets for house building. Starmer said that, as usual, Sunak had just backed down in the face of his own MPs. He actually called him a blancmange Prime Minister. A little unfair because blancmange holds its shape better than Sunak. But this was continuing a theme that Starmer is building up against Sunak. That he has no idea how to fix the country that his party broke, and that when he does have an idea, he has to abandon it because he's too weak to lead it. Sunak accused Starmer of playing personality politics. And of course he was. But when you consider that the Tories were desperate to make the next election about personality politics before, it's interesting that they no longer want to do so now. What does it say about Sunak if he doesn't think he can beat Starmer in a personality contest? That being said, if you don't think your guy can win a personality contest, then you absolutely attack the other side for making politics about personalities rather than policies. Sunak got that response right, but his problem is that Starmer is more than happy to press the government on policies as well. He said that Labour would have helped him get the votes he needed. He made the offer last week as well. Obviously, politicians play party political games. They do it all the time. If party politics didn't work, we wouldn't have political parties. And it's for each party to claim that they are best representing the people and that everyone else is just playing party political games. But if the government is trying to claim that the opposition is playing petty politics, as Sunak put it, and then the opposition says, well, we would have helped you with the votes to get your plan through Parliament, the ploy backfires. Sunak wanted these house building targets. Of course he did. If he didn't, then the plan would never have been scheduled for a debate and a vote. He can't claim he's changed his mind on it, because that would have happened at like committee stage or something, when it was being discussed in cabinet or within departments. He scheduled it for a debate and vote. Then he pulled it. So the government wanted it to go through. It was pulled because it wasn't going to go through. Only it would have gone through because Labour said they'd support it. So the reason it was pulled wasn't because the votes weren't there, but because Sunak needed Labour votes to get it through, and he refused to accept those Labour votes. Now that is party political games right there. And then Sunak made it worse. So when Starmer reiterated the offer, Sunak specifically said he'd refuse to cooperate with Labour for votes because of their record. I'm thinking, well, what record is there that has any bearing on the here and now? Also, Labour's record is of promising a certain level of house building when they were in power and then achieving it. Sunak's Tories are not able to claim that record, are they? And by pulling that vote, they've made it now impossible to achieve. So imagine how this looks strategically. Parties, of course, have got their loyal voters. They all do. But the ones that they're chasing are the largely non-partisan swing voters. The ones who can't be asked with all the party politics. A non-partisan voter, they can see the country's in a certain amount of trouble. They can see that certain solutions need applying. They don't care about party politics. What they want is for all of the politicians to forget about their colours and work together to just get stuff done. So Labour say they will help the Tories to get one of their plans implemented. The Tories refuse. How does that look to the non-partisan swing voters? Obviously, we know that Sunak was basically trapped by his own party here, but the defence was so ham-fisted. Then Starmer praised Rishi Sunak for another U-turn, wind farms this time, but then turned to the Michelle Mone scandal. I discussed that in more detail earlier. He asked how Baroness Mone ended up with 30 million quid in her bank account as a result, and Sunak claimed to have been shocked to have read of it, and that she no longer had the Tory whip. And I was thinking, well, that's news to me and others, because this is the first anyone had suggested that the whip had been withdrawn. I was talking even, earlier today that she still had the Tory whip. And then, and then you think about what he actually said. So he didn't actually say he'd withdrawn the whip. What he said was that because she was no longer attending the House of Lords, she no longer had the Conservative whip. And I'm thinking, well, first of all, I don't think that's how it works. Because first of all, she doesn't technically have this so-called leave of absence because it shouldn't be granted. Second of all, she'd come back whenever she wants. No one can stop her. And if she did, she'd be a Conservative peer, wouldn't she? And the other thing is, Sunak is basically suggesting that the reason why Baroness Mone no longer has the Tory whip is because she effectively withdrew it from herself by declaring this leave of absence from the House of Lords. Isn't he just admitting that he was too weak to do it himself? He then tried to blame Labour for rail strikes in an answer to a question nobody asked, but Starmer didn't seem to mind picking that theme up. After all, Sunak had given him an open goal. It'd be rude not to take advantage. And Starmer said, well, it might not seem like it, but Sunak is the Prime Minister. And he said it was for him to resolve the rail strikes. But then he came back to the Mone scandal and he said that Sunak was the Chancellor while all these contracts were being given out. But Sunak, of course, wanted to move on from the scandal. He didn't want to answer any questions about that. And he went back onto the strikes. So he said, look, the government's going to legislate on minimum standards for strikes. Will Labour back this plan? Now, even I could see the trap here because I'd been paying a little bit of attention to some of the stuff that had been going on in Parliament this morning. And Starmer brought it up as well. Starmer said that Sunak clearly hadn't been listening to what Mark Harper, who's the Transport Secretary, had been telling MPs this morning. So basically, the person Rishi Sunak personally appointed to be Transport Secretary was addressing MPs this morning. Labour had actually asked the Minister about the government's plans to ensure a minimum level of service during rail strikes. And it was Harper, Sunak's own minister, who told not just Labour but any MPs that were there that this government plan wouldn't actually help with the current situation, and that's why they weren't going to prioritise it. That's why they weren't going to rush through a vote. So Sunak in PMQs was trying to big up a plan that he was saying will minimise rail disruption from strikes and asking if Labour would support it. But his own Transport Secretary was dismissing the plan earlier that very same day at that same dispatch box in the House of Commons as of no value in the current situation. This government is an uncoordinated shambles. I thought the Tories put Sunak in charge to bring back some semblance of professionalism. But then Starmer asked his last question, and it was a good one because I've said before, it's difficult to make the final question a tough one for the Prime Minister. The first 5 questions, the ones where you try and put them on the spot. The last one, whatever the Prime Minister wants to do, Starmer can't come back at it. So Johnson used to take advantage of this by going off on an unrelated rant about whatever he thought were useful lines of attack on Labour. He used to turn it into a party political. No bearing on the question at all. And Sunak been in the habit of doing something quite similar. And it's a sensible approach to take, of course it is. So really, to be useful, there's no point in asking a question that is just going to be dodged. There are 2 types of final question you can ask and be useful if you want to piss on the Prime Minister's bonfire. You can either just basically make a statement, disguise it as a question, but basically you're just getting some information across to the public because you know that no genuine question is going to be answered. Or You can ask a question, but it needs to be one that makes the Prime Minister look crass and ignorant if they ignore it. And on this occasion, Starmer opted for the latter. It's not always easy to do these. He asked what the government were going to do to protect children from the strep A infections this winter. Grandstand on that question at your peril, Sunak. As it happens, he wasn't that stupid, and he did just answer the question, saying that there's no shortage of antibiotics, for example, which is a lie because pharmacists are reporting concerns about stocks. But at least he was trapped into answering the question. He couldn't grandstand. Even if he didn't actually answer the question truthfully, he did at least answer the question. Then on to the SNP's questions. This is getting a bit tasty. So Stephen Flynn, he's now the new Westminster leader. He began by praising Ian Blackford's time in the role, whilst asking if the former leader would mind returning the dagger he'd stuck in his back for future use. Just kidding, he didn't ask for the dagger back. But then he continued a similar line to the one that Blackford used last week. So Blackford last week started to basically bring Labour into the attack. Attacking Labour and the Tories as if they, two cheeks to the same arse type thing. And that was quite interesting. I commented on that last week. Flynn did the same thing. He asked a question. He was saying, asking Sunak what he thought the greatest Tory achievement was it. And this big long list of things like, leaving the single market, ending our freedom of movement, denying democracy to Scotland and so on. And he finished with, or getting Labour to agree with all of these things, bringing Labour into it. And I thought, bit cheeky, because Labour, yes, has an unfortunate Brexit position, which I have to defend quite a lot. But it is still not their position that leaving the single market was a good move. It's not their position that, oh yeah, we got it wrong. We should have left the single market. Yeah, in fact, Starmer re-emphasised his support for remaining in the single market as recently as this Monday. It's just that he reckons it's not worth trying to get back anytime soon. Yeah, but that's politics. But like I said last week, it's interesting that the SNP are now bringing Labour into their lines of attack, along with the Tories. And it's like proper party politics again. I think often the problem is I've seen a lot of comments from people who sort of feel that you've basically got the Tories, maybe the DUP, Reform UK and that sort of thing, and then you've got progressive parties, and that progressive parties should be working together. And I do get from non-partisan people why they would want that, but they're not the same. They're not on the same side. It's they just happen to agree that the Tories are the worst of all options. But they all have major areas of disagreement. Labour, the SNP, Lib Dems, Green, Plaid, they're all progressive, but they're all radically different in what they think is the best way to achieve progressive policies. If they weren't, then it would be madness for them to be in different parties, splitting votes between them. Why would they do that? It's just that recently Labour has been such a poor challenge to the SNP. When I say recently, I mean for years. That the SNP have been able to ignore Labour. It's not because they've been on Labour's side. It's because they can ignore the challenge from Labour because Labour were not presenting a sufficient challenge. Now that's obviously not the case. Now I know there was a poll last week showing a huge surge in support for the Westminster elections, that is, for Labour. That being said, I don't think I would make too much of that polling for two reasons. First, it was, like I said, it was a surge. Now, I always mistrust a surge in support until it's sustained, because a surge can quickly go back the other way. Also, it wasn't a YouGov or an Ipsos poll. Now, I don't automatically dismiss other polls. They can produce interesting results. But when it comes to matching voting intention polls with actual election results, only YouGov and Ipsos have got the recent history to back up the claims that they know what they're doing. Everyone else has to work quite hard to get me to credit their results on their own. I'm quite happy to sort of average it out across, but in terms of an individual one, I'm a bit sceptical. That being said, the sudden focus on Labour, as I say, is a clear sign that the SNP are recognising that renewed challenge for them, remembering what the SNP want to do at the next election. Speaking of which, that is the second reason why I would dismiss such a poll. The SNP are planning to fight the next Westminster election on a very, very different platform. And that will surely break the usual polling models, whether good or bad polling models, because they are going to try and make it, as far as their votes are concerned, a referendum on whether there should be an independence referendum. And that is going to change the voting behaviour. So I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to say I don't think any polling for Scotland, in terms of Westminster voting intention, will be all that reliable from now on in. Other polls fine, but that one I'd just be thinking, I think that the parameters will be different next time. It'll essentially be between the SNP and Labour's competing offers for more focused representation, more devolution within the UK, or full devolution as a smaller nation. Other polls will still be interesting, as I say, and after Sunak gave the predictable response to the question, I'll come back to the question, that he said that protecting the public during the pandemic, the furlough scheme and the vaccine rollout were their greatest achievements. Flynn brought in a poll that was much more his happy place. So, Ipsos, which is one of the good ones, has shown an increase in support for independence of 56% to 44%. Now, I have seen people characterise this as saying that 56% of Scottish voters support independence. The poll doesn't claim that. That's not what the poll is. Ipsos have weighted it according to likelihood to vote. You will notice, for example, there are no don't knows in there. Those have been excluded. Now, you do always have to be a little bit careful of that, because don't knows are not won't vote. But Ipsos, as I say, do weight it according to likelihood to vote. I approve of that. But we do need to be aware that there are a whole raft of don't knows who would nonetheless vote in a referendum anyway, and that we don't know which way they would tilt right now. That being said, what is important with this poll is it is showing an increase in support for independence, and that the support is above the 50% threshold as far as can be told. However you look at it, it is very compelling in terms of at least having a mechanism in place for deciding the matter democratically. And for all the Tory cretins who delighted in the Supreme Court judgment recently, thinking it was a win for them, anyone with any brains could see that this was a huge benefit to the SNP. It has resulted in a jump in favour of independence. Of course it has. If you give people freedom, they don't always have to exercise it fully. We've all got freedoms. We don't go out there exercising them all the time. There are some freedoms I have I've never exercised and never will. But it's important to know that you have them. If you tell people that all of a sudden they don't have this freedom that they feel they should, of course they're going to demand it. If Scotland is a voluntary member of the UK, that place in the UK is stronger than when it's not. It's so simple that it genuinely surprises me that the Tories, who are traditionally so good at understanding the public mood and manipulating it, can't understand. But then this is another side effect of Brexit, isn't it? The Tories have to keep facts at arm's length, which is why they're so out of touch these days. If the Tories had just legislated for a mechanism to trigger a vote under reasonable conditions, they'd have cut the rug right out from under this. They'd have won, it would be fine, it'd all actually be properly settled now, done. But instead, the imbeciles just play into the SNP's hands. Or maybe they're not that stupid. Perhaps they want Scotland to leave to make it easy to win elections in what's left of the country. I have said before, the party that benefits most, from a practical point of view, the party that benefits most from Scottish independence are the Tories. They're just not allowed to say so. I should just point out, there was an actual question to this, by the way. I talk about the poll, there is an actual question. The question was irrelevant, of course. Flynn just wanted to raise the poll. But he did ask if rising energy bills would make the support for independence go up or down. Sunak insisted that he was helping people with energy bills, which I thought that's an unfortunately timed response, really, because, well, first of all, the government have literally doubled our energy bills in a year, and there's a report just out today showing that in this country we are paying the highest electricity bills in the world. In the world. But anyway, there we are. All very interesting. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.